Welcome to Conspiracies Condensed, where history's most controversial secrets are uncovered, analyzed, and exposed. From government cover-ups to declassified experiments, we dive deep into the conspiracies that turned out to be true. They called it progress, but in the outback it sounded like thunder and tasted like metal. Australia wasn't just a test site, it was a sacrifice. Welcome to Maralinga, where loyalty to empire came with fallout. In the heart of the South Australian desert lies a scorched stretch of red earth, a place so remote, so empty, at least on paper, that the British government thought no one would notice if they blew it to hell. This was Maralinga. Between 1956 and 1963, it became the site of nuclear testing that blanketed the outback with radioactive fallout. But the real blast zone was political. This wasn't just Britain's shame. It was Australia's betrayal, because it wasn't forced upon us. Prime Minister Robert Menzies welcomed it, approved it. No referendum, no transparency, no concern for the Aboriginal communities who had lived there for generations. Just silence and bombs. In 1950s Cold War politics, loyalty to Britain was currency, and Prime Minister Robert Menzies spent it with abandon. Eager to prove Australia's worth to the empire, Menzies approved full-scale British nuclear weapons testing on Australian soil. No parliamentary debate, no public oversight, just a signature. And with that, vast areas of indigenous land were handed over for destruction. The tests were framed as safe and controlled, a necessary sacrifice in the fight for Western security. But what Menzies and his allies knew and hid was the extent of contamination. Fallout wasn't theoretical. It drifted, it settled, it poisoned. Menzies may have secured an alliance, but at what cost? Australian citizens became test subjects. Aboriginal people became collateral damage. The British didn't just test weapons, they tested Australians. At Maralinga, they conducted over 600 minor trials in addition to major detonations. These weren't just explosive tests. They involved plutonium dispersal, uranium scattering, and biological experiments to study blast effects. Service personnel were exposed. Aboriginal families were exposed. And they were rarely warned, often not even evacuated. Many soldiers were ordered to walk through the blast zones days, sometimes hours, after detonation. They were told it was safe. No protective gear, no monitoring, just orders. The government would later deny health effects, even as cancers, deformities, and deaths began to rise. From the beginning, the truth was never meant to survive. Officials used phrases like minor contamination and safe levels, knowing full well that plutonium particles can remain deadly for 24,000 years. The public was fed sanitized press releases. Soldiers were sworn to secrecy under the Official Secrets Act. Aboriginal voices were ignored or outright erased. When questions arose, inquiries were delayed, downplayed, or buried. And what did Prime Minister Menzies do? He doubled down. He didn't just allow the cover-up. He helped architect it. Australia's leader wasn't a victim of deception. He was a willing accomplice. And the silence that followed wasn't oversight. It was policy. Maralinga didn't just fade away. It seeped into the soil, into the water, into the lungs and bones of everyone nearby. Aboriginal families were never compensated. Many were never even informed. Children played in contaminated craters. Elders hunted kangaroo across radioactive plains. And decades later, cancer clusters began appearing. Miscarriages, birth defects, generations poisoned by a government that claimed the tests were harmless. British scientists later admitted the site was never properly cleaned. Plutonium particles still blow across the outback with every dust storm. Maralinga was never just a test site. It became a symbol of betrayal, of racism, of expendability. The fallout didn't stop with the tests. It never does. To this day, Robert Menzies is hailed by some as Australia's greatest Prime Minister. They speak of economic stability. They praise his loyalty to Britain. But loyalty without accountability is not leadership. What Menzies truly delivered was consent, unquestioning, uncritical, to an empire that used Australian soil and people like disposable lab samples. He never faced trial, never offered an apology. And yet the myth persists. But myths can't mask radiation, and legacy means nothing to those who grew up burying relatives beneath poisoned ground. The truth is simple. Menzies chose loyalty to empire over duty to his people, and Australia paid the price in blood, bone, and silence. Decades passed, survivors aged, governments changed. But Maralinga stayed toxic, physically, politically, and morally. In the 1980s, after intense pressure, an inquiry was launched. The McClelland Royal Commission confirmed what victims already knew. There had been contamination. There had been cover-ups. There had been criminal negligence. Australia spent hundreds of millions trying to clean the site. But you can't scrub plutonium out of history. Aboriginal communities were offered meager compensation. Decades too late. Some were never compensated at all. And Robert Menzies still has buildings, awards, and schools named in his honor. Not a monument to Maralinga in sight. The story of Maralinga is not about the Cold War. It's not about science. It's about silence. Silence from a government that sold out its people. Silence from a prime minister who called it patriotism. But silence is dangerous. It lets the lies settle like fallout. Unseen, but still deadly. This isn't ancient history. Radiation still lingers in that red dirt. And so do the ghosts. The children born sick. The soldiers who died confused. The elders who watched their homeland turn to ash. If we don't tell this story, who will? Because in the end, the worst contamination is forgetting. The bombs are gone. The silence remains. But silence is a choice. And this time, we choose to speak. Subscribe for more unfiltered history and join us as we expose the truths they tried to bury.